Hey everybody, welcome to Author Talk. I'm Sarah Donovan, and we are meeting with authors who contributed so generously to Just YA, an anthology of short poems and stories and nonfiction essays for youth grades 7 through 12 and their teachers, of course. This anthology is available online for free, open access, printing, sharing, and you can also get a paperback copy if you would like to buy one. So today we are here with Karen. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us where you are in the world?
Hey, thank you, Sarah, for inviting me. My name is Karen Weyant, and I am from my office at Jamestown Community College in Jamestown, New York. It is Western New York. It's the home of Lucille Ball. Okay, Jamestown, not the college. And I personally live about a half an hour south in Warren, Pennsylvania. So it's about a half-hour commute right across the border.
And I've been asking some of our authors about this question, which I'm sorry I didn't prompt you. I was going to ask you.
Mhm.
Have you always seen yourself as a writer?
When I was a child, I used to do what I call these little picture books for my friends, maybe five or six. And I did write as a teenager, but I don't really think I saw myself as a writer until my late 20s. When I went to college, I became an English major, but it was more English literature. It was more reading than writing. And then I did spend my time as a small town newspaper for about 2 years. But then I went into graduate school and I went into academia, and I didn't do a lot of creative writing for some time until I got my first full-time position here at JCC.
All right.
So I guess the short answer is no, not really.
Has it been a journey for you to name yourself writer or creative writer? Or does that name or that author title come naturally to you now?
Well, I'm more comfortable now than I was in even more recent past. It didn't become comfortable to me until my colleagues started introducing me as the English department writer or the creative arm in the English department. We have a relatively small English department. There's six full-timers. And as the full-timer, I'm probably the one that does the most creative work.
Okay, wonderful. It's helpful to get a little, to just gather some of these ideas about how we name ourselves author or writer and the kind of the myths or beliefs around that. So thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
Well, what poem are you going to share with us today?
Okay, the poem I'd like to read is called Couple Skate. And I'm also reading out of the book, although I realize that it's online. Okay. And I do write a lot about my background. A lot of my poems are stories and they're narratives. Um, so this particular poem is about a real memory that I had. But there's also a lot of deeper meaning in it. And you could probably, as you listen, guess my age, because I'm some pop culture references that if I said in my class today, my students would not know unless their parents knew them. Okay. So the poem is called Couple Skate. When the lights dimmed, we knew to start looking for a partner, and I always picked the same one, a boy with dark hair and a shy smile. We reached for each other, our hands not yet set, strides on the rink, confident and sure as we moved to Air Supply and REO Speedwagon. These were groups we made fun of, but whose songs were perfect for slow skating. The disco ball threw silver onto the hardwork floor. The black light made everything white glow. Once I saw a girl flaunt her bra when it shone bright underneath her thin crocheted sweater. But I wasn't so bold. For days before every roller skate rink excursion, I tried on different outfits, making sure that the same thing didn't happen to me. Still, whenever I skated with that boy, the one with dark hair and a shy smile, I hunched over, trying to hide myself, even though he stared straight ahead, really looking my way.
I just love this moment for so many reasons. What kind of stands out to you as you read it aloud today?
Um, well, it is a narrative poem. It tells a story. When I teach poetry, I often start with narrative poems, and many students and many members of the community, I also teach poetry classes in the community, are surprised that poems can be stories. So, they look at this and say, well, what is the difference between this poem and a short story? And I'll say, okay, let's talk about this. And we talk about line breaks, we talk about imagery, we talk about brevity. So it is a story, but I think a couple things are going on. It's in the love section of this anthology, and it is about first love or first crushes, but it's also about being uncomfortable about our bodies. And the poem is based on a real life memory, and I was pretty young when this happened. But even today, when my students write poems and they write short stories, especially my young women, they often have stories about where they're showing discomfort with their body. And I think, yes, it could be seen as a cute crush poem, but it also could be seen a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's what makes a poem good. Well, we often talk about that in our classes about what makes a good poem or an effective poem or a meaningful poem. And when one of the things we usually come to is the conclusion it is doing a couple different things. It's commenting on an intersection of ways of being, whether it's love, but also our bodies, but also the places that we get to interact with others. I think the roller rink was a place where people came together that wasn't school, right? And it wasn't, it had a different kind of set of rules or a different way of almost like permission to be moving our bodies and to be moving close to people. And there was a couple skate, there was music that signaled different things that you might be doing. And the people who get out there and skate and the people who stay on the perimeter, there's a lot of those different parts. And then also this, that it's telling a story in just this moment, like just this sort of vignette, but there's still a beginning, middle, and end, and there's still kind of a plot too, right? All of those beautiful things. So one of the reasons when we read your poem, we loved it so much and wanted to put it in the anthology is for that reason, because it was doing a lot of great things and it inspires, teachers can use it to inspire students to do a little bit of autobiographical narrative writing in short form. And it's really accessible in that way too. Just love it so much. So we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're working on now. Like what kind of writing are you doing? What kind of projects? I know you also are in higher education, so I'm sure you're very busy with your classes, but
I teach a variety classes of here at JCC. This semester, I'm excited because I am teaching a creative nonfiction class. And it's a type of class I don't get to teach as much. I teach a lot of composition classes. So I am excited about that class. As for my poetry, I published my first full-length collection last year, and it was called Avoiding the Rapture, and it's about growing up in a very challenging time in the United States, which was in the 1980s. So there's a lot of narrative poems, much like the poem I read today, although that poem is not in that book. But the next collection I'm working on, and it's taken me a little bit long, like, is about working class women in factories. And there are some narrative poems of my experience when I worked in a factory, but also my parents' experience, my mother's experience, and some historical perspectives as well. And that is, I'm hoping to be done with that in maybe another year. But again, my research is I fell down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with my research, and I've been finding more and more research and not really writing about it right now. So that's taken me a little bit longer than I'd like.
hmm.
Mhm.
Well, that's lovely to hear a little bit about the process of sort of historical research being infused into the poetry and in that work. And which I think is another great idea for teachers to do with their students is to, teach them how to do some of that inquiry and research work and then synthesize it into some poems or different perspectives, which I think would be a lovely project to do. So your book, when it's ready, will be a great mentor text, I think, for teachers in the classroom too.
Thank you.
So as we close, is there anything that you would like to say to teachers or youth who are reading your poem or just about writing in general?
Well, I think that not necessarily just my poems, but the number one thing students is not to be afraid of poetry. Poetry is something people are afraid of. I know that when I do community events with poetry, especially workshops, I don't get as many participants as I do other types of genre. And it comes down to the fact that community members have told me this, but also my students have told me this, that poetry is afraid. They're afraid of poetry because they're afraid of getting the meanings wrong. And perhaps that's something that we spend too much time on is interpreting and not necessarily writing. Although I think it's important to read poetry too. So I guess my number one word of advice or number one phrase is not to be afraid of poetry.
Mhm. I love that. And I want to
Mhm.
hold on to that as we encourage our youth to read this anthology and enjoy the poems just for the sake of enjoying them. And no need to do analysis or interpretation right the first time
Exactly.
around. Just enjoy. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Karen.